Hey, everybody. So welcome to the second panel of the day we have here at IaCConf 2026. Really excited about this panel. So the title, How DevOps Friction Turns into Real Products. You've got a pretty amazing selection here of co-founders, product builders from Infisical, who's just joining. Vlad is joining from the backstage right now. Incident.io, and Cortex. And this is going to be moderated by Serena, who I will gladly hand over the reins to, who can intro the panel and intro the panelists. Over to you, Serena.
Awesome. Thanks, Gareth. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining us. This conversation feels especially relevant right now because AI is accelerating how quickly teams build and ship software and are putting new pressure on the infrastructure and ops teams supporting them. My name's Serena Chechile, and I'm the moderator for today's panel. I've spent the last 10 to 15 years of my career focused on dev tooling and platform experiences. Most recently at JPMorgan Chase, I led UX for dev tooling, where we built an internal developer portal and platform experience used by more than 55,000 engineers. Prior to that at Red Hat, I led product for a dev portal offering that was built on Backstage. Today's panelists are founders building across different parts of the ecosystem. Chris, why don't you start by telling us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you. So my name's Chris. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Incident.io. So we are an incident management and software reliability company. So think, on-call, incident response, status pages, and then very soon AI SRE type things, so helping you debug issues in production. Sort of my background goes back a long way into like software engineering, so I spent a long time doing that. I then drifted into platform and SRE things, running teams there, developer experience, and then when the opportunity to talk at this conference came up, was super excited because I have sort of lived and breathed that kind of friction side of things, forcing me to build a thing, and that was literally where Incident.io came out of. So I sort of built the first versions of this back at a bank in the UK called Monzo, and that then snowballed into us building the company that we have here today. But really excited to get into things.
Awesome, thanks. Ganesh, why don't we start with you? Go to you next.
Yeah, I'm Ganesh, one of the co-founders and CTO at Cortex. Cortex is an engineering operations platform to think service catalog, scorecard, self-service, engineering metrics, and everything between, helping you run and operate your engineering organization. I was a software engineer before. At my previous job in fintech, I saw the monolith to microservice journey from service 1 to hundreds plus, played many roles along the way, from building out our first project scaffolding and being part of the platform build out there to trying to wrangle our production standards and managing spreadsheets of best practices and ownership and all that kind of stuff. And eventually the spreadsheets got to me. And so started Cortex to solve all those problems. I get the opportunity to work with a lot of SRE, platform, DevX teams. So lots of learnings around folks from folks in different parts of that journey. So excited for today's panel.
Awesome. And Vlad, why don't we go to you next?
Yeah, thank you. And really excited to see Chris and Ganesh too. It's an awesome panel. So my name is Vlad, co-founder CEO of Infisical. For those of you who don't know, Infisical is a centralized platform. So we're very much on the infrastructure security side of things. So it's a centralized platform for managing your secrets, certificates, SSH keys, AI agent, workloads access, all the sensitive resources that you have across infrastructure, and working with both younger companies and startups like Hugging Face, OpenRouter, like different AI labs, but also large companies like NVIDIA, Dell, and those types of folks. So yeah, very excited for the panel today.
Awesome. Chris, why don't we start with you? And from your perspective, what advice would you give teams trying to decide whether to build internal tooling versus adopting a platform?
Yes. Well, I guess I should start by saying if it comes to incident management, you should obviously just buy. There's no question about it, and you should buy incident. No, I'm kidding. I guess to acknowledge like the sort of the obvious sort of biases here. I'm now in that sort of like favorable category of software vendor, sort of despite living and breathing this thing, which means sort of leaning towards buy. It'd be the sort of predictable take. So I will try and answer this with as much nuance as is possible here. So this is really interesting to me, the build versus buy, especially in the sort of times we find ourselves now, because I think it's a sort of argument as old as time, and you'll see this sort of every single SaaS company goes through, the journey of like, great, well, we'll build a build versus buy calculation. We'll try and convince everyone why they should buy our software versus building it themselves. And generally, I think the case against building in-house was always sort of two things broadly. It was, number one, like, hey, it's really expensive to build software. It's going to take you months and many people, and if you add the salaries up, it's going to cost a lot of money. And then there's the sort of maintenance over time is the second point, which is like, great, well, building is one part of the problem, but actually there's this like long tail of like when it goes wrong, or if you need to change things, et cetera, et cetera. I think on the build side of the equation, it is fair to say the cost of that is effectively zero these days. I mean, you could weigh up the cost of tokens, you can weigh up the cost of a week of time prompting back and forth and getting something built. But like generally, you can build pretty decent software really, really quickly. So you can sort of eradicate that as a cost. So it sort of becomes a hard case to make there. Maintenance, I think that still is a good case against building in-house, right? As maintenance, because it's software is never one and done, or if it is, it will stagnate and fall behind the market and those sorts of things. And so you can sort of argue a little bit that is a cost against and a reason not to build things internally. But my kind of hot take here is actually in the world of like Claude Code and various other things like that, even the maintenance side of the equation is not crazy hard, and there's a lot of nuance there, right? If you're building something that's high scale or has a ton of like uptime requirements and things like that, obviously like it sort of skews things. But if you're building software internally and things like that, maintenance isn't actually that hard. And so then I think you get into like the sort of question of like, well, what is the rubric you should use these days in that world where you can build and maintain things more easily? I think there's a few things that come to mind here. I think the first is that it's sort of one around like interoperability, and like broader from like software interoperability into like community human interoperability. So it's fair to say that very few tools exist in a vacuum, and so making a thing and then making it continue to work and work with all the tools around you is hard. I know a good example of this would be, let's imagine I build like 5 different tools in my organization and they all integrate with Jira because that's what our team use to manage their backlogs. And then you go, well, we're going to move from Jira to Linear, and now you're like, great, I have 5 or however many tools I have built internally that I now need to build a new integration with and think about. And it's going to get to the point where organizations get sort of frozen in this like stasis where they can't move because of things like that. So that's like one factor. I think there, I sort of touched on it, but like I think human interoperability is also a really, really big factor here. And so like building software internally is great until you go and hire a bunch of people, and then everyone comes in and is like, why don't you use literally anything I've ever heard of before? And you have this like, great, now my onboarding is harder because like I've never used your random tools you've built and stuff. So those things are challenges. I think one other point, without going too far on a sort of monologue here, I think is like expertise. It gets undervalued when you are buying software, and this is sort of only true, I think, of good in inverted commas software. But like if you're buying good software, you are not just buying pixels. You're not just buying a place to store data. You're buying the expertise of a bunch of people who spend literally every waking hour obsessing over the domain or the thing that they care about. And then there's something quite magical about like, that expertise getting applied to something where they're shipping all of the time. And so you wake up on a random Tuesday and the product that you were using that you bought just got better, and you didn't pay anything more for it, you didn't do anything more for it, but they're sort of delivering that there. So those are the things that I think about as sort of someone at an organization where I have to make the choice on build versus buying. And I think the sort of the like lasting point I would say here is, I think of this sort of like this kind of spectrum, right? There is some software which I'd put in the category of like, it's kind of closed, you should never build, which is no one's building Google Sheets, no one's building Zoom. There's good reasons why those things exist. You would just never build them. I think there is the other end of the spectrum, which is like, is this thing truly unique to your organization? Is it something that literally no one else is building that works for you? And it's another easy decision, which is yes, just build that stuff. And then in the middle, you're basically on this spectrum of making a decision of whether you are building something unique, whether you are building something that's giving you a head start industry, or on the flip side, whether you're on like walking yourself into a corner where in 2 months someone's built something that's far better than you and you're now on the back foot. So a bit of a monologue, but that's roughly how I would approach things these days.
I like the comment that you had mentioned too about building something that's headlining the industry. Like that's a key concept. I think that was really nice to hear. Ganesh, what about yourself? What do you think about, what's your perspective here?
Yeah, maybe I think Chris covered a lot, and maybe I'll add some additional nuance to maybe finding yourself. How do you determine where on the spectrum are you for that particular software, and like how do you drive that process? I think a lot of the organizations that find themselves on the spectrum where like this is really unique to us, it's a unique value proposition. There's two questions you should ask yourselves. Everyone that I talk to thinks they're a special snowflake, and 9 out of 10 times they're actually not, but you've convinced yourselves that you are. So first, I think determining truly how unique are you? Like everyone tells us, oh, our data is messed up or whatever. It's like, yes, but like, most people's is, and like that's why you're coming to us in the first place. But so ask yourself the question, actually, how special are we? And then B, how special do we want to be? This was an interesting insight I heard from a customer, which is like, we actually don't want to be special. So like things that make us less special, like we don't want to be a snowflake, and things that make us less of that snowflake are actually good things in certain areas. And so that is a question you should ask yourself. The industry standards are industry standards for a reason. And in that case, like, do you want to buy something that will help shepherd that particular part of your organization to be more standard, or is this a thing that you actually truly believe investing in is going to give you a competitive differentiator? In which case, maybe being a snowflake on that side of that is worth it. I think you should start with those two questions. From there, I think the cost of building new software obviously has gone down. The thing that maybe I will add some nuance there is in certain classes of problems, it may actually be better for you to start by building, because it's so cheap to start building, and will actually help you very quickly answer that question of like, okay, like what is the cost here? Like we know, because we see this a lot when you're buying software, is like the first inch of that software is like relatively cheap to build, and it's the depth. It's like the 80-20 thing, right? It's like the depth of the software is where complexity gets deeper and deeper, and maintaining that thing gets harder. So build that first 20% and say like, okay, we did that thing, it's super cheap, we did that in a week. Now, how much of that depth do we really need? You'll learn that over time. And so to your earlier point about Backstage, we see this a lot with our own customers, where a lot of our customers start with Backstage because it's open source. They can get it stood up. It's free, quote unquote. And then they realize, oh my God, I can see the value. Some percentage will be like, well, we want to keep maintaining this because there's something very unique that we got out of it. A lot of people say, well, we understand now what we want more deeply than we did before. And now I can go pick a vendor that's going to do those things really well. And we can actually compare vendors to each other in a much more meaningful way. And so now use the cheapness of writing software to help you determine what is actually going to be valuable to your organization and how deep you want to go in that particular piece of software. So I would say like treat AI as a tool to make that decision by building this yourself.
Curious if anybody has come into play with the question of how scalable is something. So for example, like I had mentioned, I was at JPMorgan, 55,000 developers, right? How often do you guys run into that as far as part of your build or buy decision, or with any prospective customers? Do you think that has anything to do with it?
When you say like scalability, you mean scalability of systems or expertise?
Scalability to that many users. Right.
It comes up, but interestingly enough, I think it comes up less than it ought to. It's one of the, when you tend to use software, you're like, oh, you just assume it scales, because you're not thinking about all of the under the hood stuff that's going on to make that particular thing scale. And we talk about like reliability and scalability being a feature of a product. I think it's one of the things that, as I was talking about earlier, like building that initial version of that software with AI or going with something open source might actually help you realize, like what is the scale here and how much work is it going to take to actually turn this thing into something that can scale to the requirements that we have. And I guess another question of it is, does that matter? Like, do we actually care about this thing being up 99% of the time? Is it in the critical path? Is it okay if it fails, 1 in 10 requests? And so I think like having that early version can help you understand that to some degree, but I do think that is a part of the buying process that is probably under considered as you go into it. That's one of the things that I see a lot.
Thanks. Vlad, how about yourself? Do you have anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I would say actually like the way I approach this as well is the way like how does leadership build an AI native company, right? And how should they enable their developers, but also non-developers, because everyone can code now to build different applications and so on. So at Infisical, even myself, I'm just like on the weekends building agents or apps or whatever for like some kind of niche problems that most solutions just don't solve. And it's also so fun, frankly, to build those. So I think there is a lot of value to that. Now, I think what Chris was saying as well, I feel like one of the biggest issues is like when you can build anything and when you can solve even the most niche problems, I think attention is one of the most important pieces that you want to, safeguard, because you have 55,000 developers, and I'm sure, especially at that scale, attention is really tough because people are going into all sorts of direction. And so if 55,000 of them start making 55,000 apps or agents every day, it's just going to be a nightmare. And so like you do want to have some kind of like a centralized story around what you're actually doing and so on. So I do think the way you want to differentiate is sort of thinking like, hey, what is going to give you a competitive advantage? Like what types of tools does it actually make sense to build internally that will differentiate you compared to, Citibank, Wells Fargo, and all the other banks that you might be competing with. And oftentimes, like for example, for us on the infrastructure and security front, the expertise matters, and a lot of the standard and sort of like industry leader tooling is important for companies because they're able to secure their systems, they're able to run reliably. For example, for a lot of our use cases, availability and uptime is a huge factor for people who are evaluating it, because even like 1 in a billion requests can fail because then your systems are, your credit card transactions can't work and all of those different things. So that's a factor. I do think another factor that we haven't considered is the security aspect of it. Is the applications that we're developing in-house, are they actually secure? And how do we test it? And especially with all the model improvements and Claude Mythos, even though most people, I know JPMorgan has access to it, most companies don't have access to it. So we'll see how good it is, but it is, I think it opens up a lot of risks for a lot of applications that are built internally. So it's definitely also something to consider.
Yeah. Okay, great. Let's move on to our next topic. A lot of DevOps friction isn't technical, it's operational and organizational. So how do you work with internal teams to maybe drive real adoption, not just deployment? And Ganesh, I know you have a lot of ideas around this. Why don't we start with you?
Yeah, it kind of ties back actually to the previous topic. A lot of platform teams have this mindset of like, if you build it, they will come. And it is absolutely not true. And this is part of the expertise that I think vendors can bring, because literally our paychecks are on the line. If we can't get you to adopt the thing, you will throw us out. And so we learn a lot about driving adoption. It's one of the number one things we do. But I think that's a problem with a lot of like platform rollout is it comes from a place of good intent, but the things that you ship are not directly connected to the friction that the teams are actually facing. And so, I talk a lot about bringing a product mindset to like platform or DevOps, which is how do you deliver incremental value? How do you validate it? And how do you get people to adopt it? I think that stuff is really, really important. And I think, obviously it's working with your users, but also working with stakeholders. The more, and this is like organizational dynamics, right? The more you can get additional stakeholders within the organization driving adoption and engagement with your platform, the more likely it is to succeed. So as a very specific example, golden paths, platform teams spend a lot of time thinking about golden paths, and they'll build like, oh, here's a new project bootstrapper for spinning up a repo, and like it's going to give you a new Spring Boot service bootstrapped within five minutes. It's like, okay, but like, what does that solve? Like, why would I use that versus this other thing that like I can just go and create a new repo myself? I've been doing this for a long time. And the answer is like, well, if you have other stakeholders involved, I'll take SRE as an example, that also have particular requirements. You say, hey, before you go to production, and if you want SRE guidance, you need to have observability baked in. You need to have these dashboards. You need to have on-call set up. Like these are all the things that we expect your service to be doing. We're actually going to go work with the platform team to bake those things into your project bootstrapper. So if you use that project bootstrapper, not only do you get a new repo in 5 minutes, but you also get all the things that SRE really cares about. And so now we are going to push you to use that particular bootstrapper. Now suddenly you're going at it from multiple angles, and there are more reasons for teams to adopt it. And so like partnering with stakeholders that way is a very underutilized strategy, and this is kind of like corporate dynamic type things, but it is an underutilized strategy for driving adoption of a platform.
Vlad, do you have any other thoughts around that specific piece around adoption?
Probably two thoughts. So I will say, like at Infisical, the adoption piece, even before AI, this was always the important point of discussions, because secrets management and certificates, and it's this like interesting type of tooling that's on the one hand it's security, but on the other hand it's infrastructure. And so if developers don't actually use it day to day, it's not enough to just install it, right? And you actually have to utilize it. And otherwise, what a lot of companies are running into is they're buying expensive tooling, and developers are just finding workarounds, or basically creating all types of security loopholes that you're not aware of. And so I do think for developers, the developer experience and the way how easy the tools are to use is very important. I do think the bigger piece about this right now is that as more and more organizations start adopting agents and building their own agents, the question is also kind of like, what is agent adoption of this tooling, and how does your current tooling meet the requirements of agent adoption? And if not, how do you create the right tooling internally so that agents can programmatically access different systems? It's also things like, can agents sign up for the platforms that you have, right? Cloudflare just released some interesting tooling for this, and how can you make it more and more automated compared to just people doing click ops and clicking approve, because that's just not going to scale with the speed that we're going at. So I think there's a lot of change that's happening in the adoption conversation too.
And Chris, do you have anything to add on your side?
I guess a little. I think as a software vendor, I think you care disproportionately about adoption, because literally your ability to employ and continue paying people is tied to it. So there's this part of you which is just like, fundamentally I have to think about that. I think having run platform teams where we provided toolings, and to Ganesh's point, where it's like, hey, this is how you bootstrap a service and you do these things. I think that the way that you get adoption when you're building internally and the way that you do it as a vendor are fundamentally quite different. In that, as an internal company, an internal sort of product team or a platform team, you kind of you sort of immediately have that earned ability to mandate that something gets used. You're like, this is the rule, you have to use this thing. And there's sort of like that emotional tie, and it's like, well, Chris built it, so you can't provide like harsh feedback and all that kind of stuff. And I think when you're a vendor, you don't have that. You literally have to earn that ability to roll out, and earn that ability for people to sort of trust and enjoy and like using the software. So it forcibly pushes you to have a higher bar there. And I think then the other thing that is like really interesting as a dynamic to me is that the people who build software are not often the best people at training people on how to use the software and being able to roll that software out. And that's certainly true of me, right? I can hold my hands up and go that I am far from the best person at training someone and getting large scale adoption of tooling that I've built in the past. I was fortunate enough at Monzo Bank in the past when I built the incident tooling there that it kind of just organically grew, and I never really pushed it, but it took a long time. And I think when you are sort of in the position that I'm in, like, we get to employ the best of both worlds, right? You get to have the best builders building things, and you get to have the absolute best. There's some people who work at this company who are just phenomenal, and I'm like in awe of their ability to, we're talking rolling out to thousands and thousands of people and getting everyone comfortable with new tooling and like able to use these things. I think it's a very interesting dynamic, and sort of one that I think often gets overlooked in the kind of, especially without trying to be too sort of like harsh on them, especially by engineers who often compare things with like functions and features and things like that. And some of the softer side of the evaluations of these things is a little bit overlooked.
Okay, awesome. Let's move on to our final topic. So before we go to Q&A, so given how quickly AI is changing engineering velocity, what would you design differently if you were building from scratch today? Vlad, why don't we start with you this time?
Yeah, sure. I guess the most obvious one is building for agents, right? As more and more agents are actually become the default end users of different systems and infrastructure tooling and general platforms that we're using or creating. I think that becomes the most important. I do think there is a lot of platforms like Salesforce and whatever, sort of like the system of record, that are now opening up to agents, their APIs or MCP servers or whatever it is, and they're kind of like trying to redesign themselves to be more programmatic. There's a lot of different things. So we launched this open source project at MIT called Agent Vault, which is sort of like how different agents can communicate with each other and how can they access different systems securely and these types of things. I think security is becoming much more important with the speed of development that's happening, and also the advances in the models that are happening every few months. Obviously you see all the Twitter and the news announcements with breaches and unfortunate stories that are happening with the companies. And so I do think companies need to take it very seriously, especially the next 6 to 8 months, when it's just going to go get out of hands very soon. So yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to AI. Frankly, these days it's probably cliche. It's probably at the conference sounded many times today, but yep.
Ganesh, do you have anything would you like to add here too?
Yeah, I'll kind of build on that. I would say thinking about the design of products from explicitly what behaviors are human in the loop and what are fully autonomous. I think that's an interesting thing. Maybe this is specific to our space, but as things become more and more autonomous, thinking about does a human actually need to be in the particular loop for this product decision or whatnot, versus at what points do you need humans in the loop? How do you automate those things? What information can you provide for humans to eventually get out of the loop? So I think kind of going into building products with that mindset is building for agents. That's kind of how I think about it, is breaking that apart into what can be fully agentic and what requires humans in the loop from day one.
Yeah, great perspective. Chris, how about yourself?
I think I will be entirely redundant and duplicative at this point. I think it is humans and agents designed to collaborate sort of from first principles type of thing.
Yeah, totally fair. All right, and we've got about 8 minutes left, so we can open up to Q&A. Let's see, looking at some of these questions, why don't we go to, would you suggest people building cloud orchestration platform internally or buy it? Should that decision depend on the capabilities of the team, or how much cost, time it will take, and who maintains it going forward? Who would like to take this one?
I have definitely seen a lot of this. Don't build the core primitives. Like orchestration primitives, there are, obviously we're at IaCConf, you guys know the platforms here. There's so many tools out there that can help you build the core platform primitives that you can build on top of. It goes back to the build versus buy thing. The core platform primitives of cloud orchestration things are not your unique differentiator. If you're a platform team, a developer experience team, the way that those things are delivered to your end users is where things start to get really unique. What are the things that are particularly causing pain within the organization that you can go and solve using those out-of-the-box cloud orchestration primitives is your value add. And that is where you are quote unquote special, because there's craft built up over the years and ways of working that are unique to your organization that you can go and solve very specifically. So don't build your own orchestration internally, buy it, use open source. That's my personal take on it.
Great. Let's go to the next one. Is there a certain point or critical mass of team size where the decision to build gets exponentially harder to reverse? An interesting one. Anybody want to take that one on?
I can answer my thinking on this. I think this is one of those questions where very frustratingly the answer is sort of it depends. It depends on the software and it depends on the adoption of the software. And so I think if you let's imagine you're Netflix, right? And for the sake of it being a domain that's familiar to me, imagine you're Netflix and you build your own incident tooling, right? That is something where once you have trained 5,000 engineers on how to do a thing, it becomes incredibly hard to turn that decision around. And essentially what you're playing with here when you make these decisions is in the long run this kind of ROI calculation where it's what is the return on moving to reversing a decision and going to another platform, and then what is the investment that I need to do to get there. And so it starts to become, you start to having to sort of wait until the software that is available that you could replace it with has either some crazy high return, or the investment of moving to it becomes much, much cheaper. So I just think the bigger you get, the more extreme those two ends of the spectrum get, and therefore, it does become harder to reverse. But I think absent a very specific piece of software or area or thing, it's sort of hard to be too concrete about it. I think it's sort of worth just reasoning about it from first principles, and honestly, when it comes to making decisions about build versus buy, just making sure that growth is factored into the way that you think about how you make that decision up front. So what is the best case of adoption of the thing, or how big do I think the team will be in a year's time, and do we think it makes sense, and how fast is the market closing in on the domain that I'm about to go and build, and does it make sense for me to go and invest that time there? So yeah, that'd be my sort of very slightly high level take.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Okay, let's go to one more here. What DevOps areas can be elevated in the AI era? That one's pretty interesting. Ganesh, why don't you start with that one?
All of it. I think about if you look at the recent Dora report, a lot of it talks about kind of continuing to invest in the foundations. The more confident you are in the foundations, the more quickly you can move. It's the perfect example of slowing down to speed up. And I think especially as our software development becomes more autonomous, things like true CI/CD and blue-green deployments and all that kind of stuff become ever more important. Code reviews are going away, right? Let's be honest with where the industry's going. The amount of code we're writing, it's not going to be possible for us to review every PR. And so true DevOps practices of we should be able to test the thing, ship the thing, roll it back quickly, and have a lot of these things be automated is going to be more important as humans are less in the loop within each of the systems. And so that's kind of how I think about where DevOps is becoming more elevated than ever before. If anything, I think you're going to see organizations kind of reallocate more of their engineering headcount towards that kind of infrastructure type work away from feature work, as the feature work becomes more background agent style development over the coming years. So that's maybe a hot take that I'll start with.
Thanks,
yeah, but I'll just add super quickly, but I agree. It's exactly, you need to set up the infrastructure and sort of the perimeter and guardrails for, developers to operate. And I think that's kind of the fundamentals that if you get it working, then also your organization can move faster.
Great. Let's go to the last question, which is, Vlad, let's have you answer this one. What is the one issue that you face using AI or agentic AI as a founder?
As a founder, well, I would say one issue is the increasing Anthropic bill every week. And it's unmanaged. It's kind of ridiculous. More and more people are, I guess, on Twitter they say token maxing, right? Of just using it as much as possible. I feel there is sort of a question of you can solve so many problems really fast. Which problems are actually worth solving? Maybe some problems don't need an agent that you can create for it. So it's kind of more on the company level. As a founder, I just feel you are sped up so much. I also love, building so many tools. I just wish I had more time to do that, frankly, because you can automate, so many different things and also make your life easier as a result of that. So.
Awesome. Chris, do you have any thoughts around that one for you from your perspective?
Yeah, I think all of the stuff that Vlad shared, but also I think one of the things that I think is as yet still a bit of a challenge running a company and thinking about AI and all the things that it allows is actually how it bleeds into other parts of the organization. I think it's just so abundantly clear how this is making everyone in engineering disciplines far, far better. And I think actually one of the challenges I have is what is the return on investment on tokens for other parts of the business? And I think that is as yet not super clear to me. So for example, our sales team use a lot of Claude, and I'm do I think it's gotten better, or do I think that things have gotten actually, things have got faster, but sometimes not in the right direction with quality, for example. So I'm catching things before they go out the door. I'm this reads like it's been written by Claude. Have you even read this yourself? And so I think those are the challenges I have is we care a lot about quality and taste and all of the things that go around that. It's something I have done since the beginning, and I think it's getting harder to keep guardrails around that stuff. So yeah, that's the stuff that's front of mind for me.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, I think we only have about 10 seconds left, so I'm going to wrap it up here. Thanks to the panelists for joining us today. This is a great conversation, and thanks for everybody who joined us today to listen in the Q&A session. Have a nice day.